really none of your business. It's none of my business.
Hello, buenos dias, hola, ¿cómo estamos? This is Liam Printer from the Motivated Classroom podcast, and this is the August Spotlight. We are nearly done. It is day 29, and this is the wonderful and fantastic episode with Abelardo Almázan-Vázquez. Make sure you go back and listen to this one again. This fits into a lot of the episodes I've been talking about over this last 4 or 5 have been in that social justice area, and this very much falls into that. And again, there's lots of overlap with those episodes from Maud Warrett, from Ben Tinsley, from Françoise, from Sukena, from there's so many different people we've had on speaking about social justice issues, which is hugely important to me. And so I loved some of the stuff that we talked about. This was about really kind of interrupting toxic masculinity and standing up and recognizing those more marginalized students that we may have, but also very, very importantly, which I thought Abelardo spoke about really eloquently, was again that idea of positionality and privilege and making sure that we are aware of how that can impact things, just the way Françoise told us about. So Abelardo shared this quote, which I really like. He says, "I think the idea of neutrality does not apply in our classrooms. We come to the classroom with our biases and with our preconceived notions. It's a job of every single adult in the room to work on the things that we may not know, that we're actually harming our students, harming our communities that we're talking about by stereotyping them or exoticizing them. One thing that has worked for me is understanding the idea around positionality, just as Françoise talked about. If we understand how we enter any space, not only the classroom, but entering a space and recognizing or acknowledging, for example, he says, I'm a cisgender male, I'm tall, I'm able-bodied, I have 2 passports. I carry a set of privileges that other people in my classes or colleagues don't have, and they currently don't possess. So making that exercise of analysing for a minute. Do I have to worry about choosing a restaurant in Mumbai? No. Do I have to worry about walking a dark alley at midnight without any fear? Not really. So when I do that exercise of positionality, who am I in relationship to the power and the privilege? Showcasing yourself as a vulnerable person, that you're not always going to get things right, but by modelling that vulnerability with your positionality and that influence in front of the classroom or with colleagues, that creates a great habit. And it's very similar, just recognising who you are, the privileges and biases that you may have, and we all have them regardless of where we come from, the languages we speak, the way our bodies are shaped. There will be some kind of bias and perspective and privilege at different levels there for different people. And to recognise and uphold that and be open with it when you talk about these things, but that means we still need to talk about them. And then we talked about this whole like misogynistic, sexist kind of commentary and cultures that's often prevalent among boys in our schools that we teach in. And I had a great conversation with him about this. And he says, I think, I want to answer that when we talk about sexist comments, he was saying, I want to answer that with an acknowledgement that is going to be probably a work in progress. It's not always going to be easy to practice this, but my most honest advice is to interrupt anything that is happening in the moment. Any sexist comment, any display of misogyny, any locker room talk, any jokes or things students or even colleagues may be saying that when they're trying to be funny. They're trying to just like fit in, but the important thing is to interrupt that. When I say interrupt, it looks different for different people. Some people use the term calling out, some say calling in, but whatever you do, you can't let it continue. That's my honest advice. Calling that out, interrupting those comments, the moment we do that in front of our students, it's an act of solidarity. We go from being allies to being accomplices to being by their side. It's not like we're cheering them on from the sidelines. We need to be by their side because the burden that they're carrying around, just the right to exist, just for the right to be in a space where they're not always welcome, that they will have obstacles. We can start using our privilege and our power to dismantle that with key moments, interrupting, saying things like, that's not right. And I think that that's really important. And I gave that example on the podcast of just very simply when people give that locker room chat or that joke and other people may laugh and just quietly saying like, oh, I don't get it, can you explain? And when they try and explain the sexist, horrible, misogynic comment, they kind of realise that it's not okay. We spoke a little bit about female teachers and the fact that it's one thing for us to say this as a man in this situation, but we don't have the lived experience of being a woman and what it's like to have these conversations as a woman, and that can be much more difficult. And he says, my advice for female teachers is to remember they don't always have to do the education. They've done so much already by simply existing in the space that was, or that is not always designed for them. And that's always in my mind. So changing the way we talk about actions, not people. We can say to female colleagues, you're talking about the action, But the boy who commits the microaggression, the boy who mentioned the sexist joke, we still care for that person. We still care for that boy. We're actively saying, well, we're not, it's about you, about the person, but it's about the action. The thing you just said was sexist. We're not saying you're sexist, but that comment is sexist. So that's my advice. We can't do it by ourselves. We need to find community. We need to build community. It's a difficult journey. It's not always easy to talk about this, but we need to start, because our silence is being complicit, and it's harming our female colleagues and students who are trans or non-binary as well. And I think that is such a moment to end on, because Abelardo has spoken such truth, and go and look up his episode. It was a fantastic chat I had with him, episode 96. Listen to the whole thing, especially if you teach in an environment where you come across these misogynistic, sexist locker room chat, or however you want to call it. And it often is middle school, high school boys that come out with these things. Now and again, girls too, but in the most part is groups of boys. So if you work around that, please go and listen to this episode. Muchas gracias, Abelardo. Adios.